I know, ridiculously quickly. I want to say just thank you for helping me with this. It's been nice little projects that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I wanted to get someone with your kind of experience on probably one of the biggest project issues that's going on in the UK right now. So thank you for coming on board and answering questions about it.
It's all right. The audio's cutting out a little bit. I wonder if maybe my video doesn't work here, but I wonder if maybe if you could turn your video off, it's just a bandwidth thing, I think.
Right, okay.
I don't know why. I've had this before with Skype. It just, I missed the last sort of sentence that you said.
Sorry.
I saw it was sort of move, your mouth was moving, but no sound was coming through.
Right, what about now? Is that better?
That's much better.
Fantastic.
Much clearer, yeah. I don't know why it does that. It's quite unreliable.
Well, that's all right. Anyways, so let's crack on then. So if just to like a little start of it, like if you could generally summarise the HS2 project as a whole at the minute in one word, what would you use?
Contentious.
Right.
Probably.
Could you elaborate on that for me, please?
It's just the case of so many people don't want it, and probably an equal amount of people do want it. It just feels that, to be honest with you, I don't really have an opinion on it myself in terms of whether it's good or not. There's advantages and disadvantages to doing projects like this. It's one of those. I think it's being pushed by Boris Johnson. So it's sort of if you remember from last year, it's the sort of sacred cow type of project, if you like, where he wants to be seen to be doing well. He wants to be seen to be pushing these massive infrastructure projects because he's seeing them going all across Europe and particularly in Asia, and he doesn't like the idea of Britain being left behind. The problem with that is it's fine, and it's great. You've got the head of the country behind it, so the project's going to get all the funding it needs. It's going to get all the resources it needs. The issue, and you have to sort of be careful what you say here, because the issue is it's the competence of the person that wants the project to succeed that will ultimately lead to its success or failure.
Yeah.
So, however good Boris is at sort of, well, whether it is Boris or whether it's Dominic Cummings pushing things through, it depends on their sort of ability and their ability to not just sort of go, I'm not interested in that anymore, I'll just do something else. So, I can understand why people don't want it, but I can also understand why people do want it as well.
I think we've got that. You see this quite a lot in Europe. Like you were referencing earlier to all the high-speed trains and all the infrastructure projects in Asia. I was in Japan last year and I got to experience the high-speed rail. And while it was it is amazing. It is amazing if you do it right. Like we've seen so many times over Europe and predominantly Spain as well, where there's been these massive high-speed train rail projects, and they've just not come into place. What the difference is for it happening in Asia and happening in Europe is, I generally don't know. I've got a stat here because I was going to ask you a bit about this later on, but now that you've brought it up, it was the European Conduct the ECA, which is essentially an auditing aspect of a lot of European projects, and they did a report on basically these high-speed rail projects across Europe. And they found that they're running at around 45% of their total velocity, so they're not actually running to full capacity. And that's one of the issues which is talking about with HS2 as well, where it's going to be good for the busy periods, but the lines that are operating, apart from them busy periods, they're not really used that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I mean, also, in terms of I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that is the biggest issue: is it actually going to be used for all the money that's going to be thrown at it? You've got an increase now in people working from home, an increase in people trying to move away from London in terms of their headquarters. You see Manchester now becoming a bit more of this whole northern powerhouse thing. Seems to be being plugged. I don't know if it's actually a proper commitment, but you see Birmingham and Manchester having a lot more investment in them. If you've got people that don't go to London on a regular basis, or You know, if they are happy to say, well, I'll just continue on the trains that I use. Okay, they'll take 2 hours as opposed to an hour or an hour and a half, but they're half the price, and I can get some work done when I'm sat on that train. I think that's the worry in that sense. It's got to wash its own face.
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you mean. I think I think there's been a long thing about a lot of people take this whole project for what it is, and it's saying that it's for the Northern Powerhouse, when in reality it's by getting people to have greater access to London it's just like it's saying, yeah, people can move a bit further out and get to the capital quicker, but what about what's happening up north? I completely get that. One thing I do want to ask you about, from your perception of that you've seen a few of these big government projects. When I was a student of yours, we spoke a lot about the National Programme for IT. After doing a bit of research, I understand the Eurotunnel had a lot of scepticism about it. Do you think this is the projects that's had the most skepticism, government project that has the biggest skepticism, biggest critics in our recent history, or do you think it's just like all the projects that have been, and it'll just pass off?
I think there's always been speculation and scrutinisation, if you like, of public sector projects, simply because it's our money that's being used and people don't like the idea of it. I mean, my dad used to work for the civil service, and he said it was disgusting, really, the amount of times that he'd go into meetings of people. This is in the 80s and the 90s, when they were developing new IT systems, obviously with an outsourcer. So the company had come in and they completely under budget or under quote what was actually required, so they'd get the contract, and then, because they knew that the civil servants would then say, oh, actually, can we get it to do this? And they go, yeah, of course we can get it to do that. It's going to cost you another 2 million. And they go, oh, okay, well, it's not really my money, so we'll do it, sort of thing. I mean, that was in the golden age of public sector, when it had a lot more money to spend. We're a lot tighter on money in the public sector now, in particular. We seem, to be honest, at the moment, as a public sector, to be obsessed with cost savings and obsessed with money, as opposed to being obsessed with how those investments are actually going to change things. And going back to your point earlier about how you see the differences between Europe and Asia, the Japanese sort of culture, if you like, is invest today and reap the rewards tomorrow, whereas the Western culture seems to be, if I put money into this, I want my money back now. So it's that, and that seems to be the difference between. So the Japanese are quite happy to throw money at things because they know in 5-10 years' time they'll get. If they don't get their money back, they'll get a benefit to society. It's like that example of the bullet train, where if you the bullet train is so reliable that if it's ever late, they have little printers on the actual train that print out a little ticket that the passengers can take into their work and say, I'm sorry I was late, but this is the reason I was late. This receipt here that I've printed off on the train proves that reason. That's how sort of important time is, if you like, to Japanese business. But because they've invested heavily in the bullet train and in the public infrastructure, they know that they can get money back in terms of a stronger economy or a healthier population or things like that.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think quite a lot of people have heard that fact about when you go into Japan, and if it is late, it's so rare that you get that ticket. I think, imagine being a London commuter, that just makes you want to cry, really.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, well, you kind of highlighted a point early when you were talking about your dad, who they used to when they used to do government projects, that they used to underbid as much as possible and then ask for more money there. From the research that I've done, there's similar elements that have gone on in this with the HS2, which is why originally, when it was set out in 2010, it was supposed to be 32 billion, and then 10 years later, it's projected to be 106 billion. One thing that seemed pretty good by the company that's doing HS2, who's organising it, they set a condition for contractors to basically, if any spending that goes 60% over the budget that the contractors said that they could do it at, the contractor spends. They have to spend it out of their own money, which I found that a very good aspect of doing, but it doesn't seem to work. I don't know if you've heard of this or if you've seen it before, but
No, I've not. I mean, the obvious example of that going completely wrong is Carillion, obviously, with all the projects that because I think Carillion were actually involved in HS2 at the start, and they probably sort of added to the delays when they went bust. You know, they particularly the Royal Hospital in Liverpool.
Yes,
there was. I mean, it was never confirmed, but there was a consensus that they went for the risky projects because they knew that things would change and they could make more money in that sense. But unfortunately, they overstretched themselves and went across too many risky projects and then ended up being in debt. But, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, the thing is, like you say, it should be 2010. I mean, we've already spent £9 billion on this now. And there's reports now that have come out and said that if we cancel it, it's going to cost us another 12 billion. So, you know, I mean, you're talking over 20 billion just wasted for nothing. But then they're saying, well, to do it fully, it's going to cost you 88 billion.
That was so the 2019 was 88 billion. Oops, sorry. 2019 it was supposed to be registered at 88 billion ever since, and new figures, while they're not official, but they've come out of, I think it was the Financial Times or the Guardian report that it was supposed to be 106 billion, which is what are you saying? Like, would you want to just lose 20 billion? No, but then as you look at the cost benefit analysis, it depends on what this project will be at the end.
Exactly, and this, you know, when you've had 10 years of austerity, you think that 88 billion, 106 billion, however much it is, it's going to go, like you say, it's going to go up. It'll go up anyway with inflation. It amazes me when governments say we're putting record numbers of funding into NHS or things like that. Yes, you are, but that's inflation.
Exactly, yeah.
Of course it's record numbers because it's going up all the time. But, and like you say, it's 106 billion now. What's it going to be like in 5 years? So I think that's the contentious part. The other contentious part is the poor people that this is going to be built next to their houses. And we're not talking sort of, you know, typical sort of countryside here. We're talking about Tory heartlands here, people who voted for the Conservatives and, you know, in Surrey, and they're nice leafy places, and they're going to have their property prices sort of completely devalued, and a train going past every 5 minutes, you know. So it is a risk, and I think that's why a lot of the backbenchers in the Tory ranks are against it, because they think if we do this now, you know, it's like the extra Heathrow runway when Boris stood up and he said, "I will lie down with you on the runway and stop the diggers." You know, he didn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's one of those, isn't it, where it can politically cause quite a lot of damage.
This is the thing, and now because the Tories are set in for another 5 years, so they kind of have the wiggle room to do this type of projects that they want. But it's very interesting, like you said, because it's gone on so much controversy of how it's ploughed through different areas, and even to the point where it looks a bit on the poor planning on the aspects of the project, which fascinates me with the story that I read, was that while probably misbudgeting happens in a lot of projects, as you will know, is that a big impact of this project while building it forward is the misaccounting of the type of soil that they're having to dig through. And this is another factor that's added costs and everything, and it just seems quite fascinating that it just doesn't seem budgeted correctly at all, and it seems it's going to be completely spiral out of control from my point of view. I can see some of the benefits of it, but sorry, I can see obviously can see the benefits of some of the projects, but while when I was doing your class, I did the national program for IT, and that was another one that kind of just kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was a long time project. But this obviously amplifies that to a lot bigger extent, but based on costs. And yeah, it's just fascinating of how much you can do inaccurate and how it's going to just spiral out in the long term.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? And in 10 years' time, you know, we don't know. The way technology is changing and the way people are changing their methods of working, if you like, you just don't know in 10 years' time. I mean, you know, we could all be sat at home with virtual reality headsets on, talking to each other as if we were in an office. You know, we are people wanting to go to London. This whole thing of London being the centre of the country, it might become a bit of a artificial, old-fashioned way of looking at things. If you look at the backbone of any economy, it's always the small businesses. Now,
Yes.
the small businesses can't afford to be in London, so should we not start to sort of? You've got the southeast and the southwest. I think it's mainly the southwest actually complaining about poor rail infrastructure there. There's talks now of some of the railway lines that were closed by Beecham after the Second World War because they were not profitable at the time. There's talks of some of them being reopened, and you think that would be more beneficial if you did that around the country as opposed to just going for the commuters that come to London 2-3 times a week, but will they still continue to come that many times? I mean, the obvious example, I know some people did for the assignment, they did the Edinburgh tram project, which was another one, and we were supposed to have a tram in Liverpool that was supposed to go up Mount Pleasant, and they spent a lot of money doing all the sort of research and all the this is what can happen, and this is the cost-benefit analysis and all of this, and it looked really good, and then just, the Edinburgh tram one in particular, they must have gone through about 10 different project managers because it just became unmanageable. And like you say, I'm with you on it. I think it is going to take some very strong management for it to be a success.
Yeah, but it is. None of us can never predict the future. One thing I kind of want to ask you about as well is obviously as a project manager, you can say that the scope and the scope of the project, the budget of the project, and the time of when it's delivered are the three most important things that you should know. Well, you should look for. Which of them would you say would be the most important in the context, if you had to choose, in the context of HS2?
Let's see. I mean, I think probably at the start, it probably changes as the project progresses. I mean, at the start, and I think, to be honest, cost probably is the most important, simply because it's taxpayers' money that's being used. So that'll be the one that's scrutinised the most. People won't really mind if it's late, as long as it's not massively over budget. But unfortunately, those two things go hand in hand. The sort of hidden dimension, if you like, there of that triple constraint is quality.
Yes.
And obviously, you change any one of those three on the triangle, all the others are going to be impacted. But quality, I think, is very important here as well, because that will be the reason why people do or don't use it. If it's a poor quality service or if it doesn't live up to its expectations, these projects are often oversold in order to get the funding that they need. If it's not a quality product at the end, people will just say, well, it's better to just stick with Virgin Trains because I know it's longer, but I get a much nicer seat in first class and it's half the price, and then what do you do then? I mean, I think the difficult thing is once you start digging, you can't really stop, can you? Because what are you going to do? Are you going to build a train line, and then keep going all the way through and disrupt a load of people and then get halfway to Birmingham and then say, actually, this isn't worth it? What do you do then? Do you just stick a station at the end and hope for the best there? I mean, it's very, very difficult. It's not like a building where you can just sort of say, right, we'll stop there. All right, this was supposed to be, for this purpose, but we don't want to do it anymore. And somebody else will come in and say, well, I'll buy that building off you and I'll use it for something else. Can't do that with a train line.
I think one of the fears that I have is that obviously phase one is the main bit, so it's going from London to Birmingham, and then they plan to do phase 2A, which breaks off into goes to Manchester from Birmingham, and phase 2B, which goes from Birmingham to Sheffield to Leeds. As someone who's I'm originally from Leeds as well and kind of resides in the north, I think the biggest fear that I have is, right, well, they'll plan to do phase 1 and then they'll cut it off of phase 1, and then you've just got the Midlands, which will benefit. That the Midlands are probably one of the ones that stand to benefit the most from this, but then again, it just leaves the northern bit just completely out. I think that's probably the biggest fear from my aspect of what could happen with this project.
Yeah, and 100%, I can see that happening. I mean, like you say, it'll get to a stage and they'll say, well, we've already overspent. We can't then go and do phase 2 because people will be up in arms or whatever. The other thing as well is, if you've got self-driving cars, surely the money should be put into smart motorways. If that's the future with electric cars and then eventually self-driving, will we actually ever need trains? It'll be a little bit like, will people own their own cars? You don't know. It could be like an Uber thing. You get it on your app and say, yes, I want a car from here to there, and it drives you to it automatically. But I think people would rather have that than go on trains, especially now with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to go on the tube if I had to. If I could just get a self-driving car to take me there. So it's like you say, it's going to be very interesting because they're selling it as an advantage. They're saying, well, the cost is spread over 15 to 20 years. In 15, 20 years, rail travel might be dead. You just don't know.
Well, that's one of the key selling points that they were saying, like in the aspect of environments and the aspect of the environment, that it'll take more cars off the road. It'll stop people flying less from Manchester to down to London. It's looking to take commuters off other forms of transport and add it onto there. And like the point that you said, that self-driving cars may be the future. From my estimations, I think it's going to be a bit longer than people say. Like the likes of Elon Musk like to shortcut things. I think it'll be a bit longer. I think maybe about 10, 15 years. So we could get to this point when HS2 is delivered, and then this new amazing level 5 autonomous vehicle technology, which will improve traffic lanes, because at the end of the day, computers will be able to drive better than humans, and it will eliminate traffic discrepancies. That will arrive maybe at the same time as HS2 is supposed to be laid out, and this 106 billion or whatever it might be may just have been a waste of investment.
Yeah, absolutely. When you could have spent that, we've got some of the worst roads in Europe. I remember a couple of years ago, BMW said that a lot of customers were complaining to BMW because they bought these really nice 18-inch alloy wheels, and they were cracking. And they take them back to BMW, and BMW's response was, well, they work on the German roads. It's just British roads have got too many potholes in them, and obviously it didn't wash, and people got their money back. But it just shows you that we've got, if you put that amount of money into the roads, more people would use them. The counter argument to that is, well, you can get from Birmingham to London in an hour on the train. You wouldn't be able to do that in the car. But I've heard other arguments that say, well, if every car is an autonomous self-driving, can think for itself, they can go whatever speed they want on the motorways, and you'll never have traffic congestion because they'll all be talking to each other. So it could be a case of, like you say, it could be completely and utterly defunct as soon as it's created.
One thing when I was referencing to earlier about choosing the most important between scope, time, and costs. There's been a few theories of bit of research of what people could do to bring down the costs. But obviously it means changing the scope. So the main one is basically turning it from a 360 kilometers per hour train to a 300 kilometers per hour train. On average, this would cut off 12. This would add on 12 minutes compared to the journey that's supposed to be said on the time from London to Manchester. So you're adding 12 minutes onto the journey than what was HS2 would be, but that could save 13 billion.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, so this is the thing. It's how much can you save in order to change the scope of the project. The other one was, at the minute, the London line's supposed to terminate at the minute in Old Oak Common, and then go from Old Oak Common to Euston. Link in to go to Euston. This could be, if it just removes that line from going to Euston and fully terminates in Old Oak Common, that could save between 2 to 7 billion. But within regards to what the Department of Transport have said, doing this alone would probably drop sales revenue by 10%. So this is the thing. So if the primary aim is to cut costs, then what bit of the scope do you diminish?
Yeah, it's all a trade-off, isn't it? I mean, common sense says build the line first, and then because that's once you've got the line, theoretically, don't order the train. And I know the trains have got a lead time to them, but the longer you delay your order of the trains, the more the technology advances, the cheaper it becomes. Like you say, if you order a train now and it's just sitting there for a year or so before it's ready, what's the point? I mean, it's like I'm having quite a lot of work done on the house at the moment, and you all you're doing is, particularly with electrics and plumbing, you're trying to future-proof yourself.
Yeah.
So if you get things ready, so I've made sure that the circuit breakers and things have more slots in them than I actually need. Because the electrician said, well, you never know what will happen in the future in terms of you might want this in lighting in the garden or whatever. You never know. So it's the same sense with that. Build the line that can take the highest capacity possible. And then if you have to go for a cheaper train now, it's going to save you, say, 13 billion. That's a lot of money to save. And then in 5 years' time, get a quicker train. I mean, I don't know how much these trains cost, but I can't think they're going to cost billions each. It's it's knowing, and again, that's where it gets complicated, because you've got to go through all the chains of command. Everybody's got to have a say. It's that whole thing of, what was the phrase? Something about a camel as a horse designed by committee or something. It's that type of thing, isn't it? Where you've got to communicate with all the stakeholders. What do you want? Is it a priority? Is that 12 minutes really, really, really important to you? I think the thing of going into Euston, I think, like you say, I think if that's going to cost you 10%, I think you've just got to do it. Because, people want to go to Euston, they don't want to go to a station. I've never heard of that station.
Yeah, same.
You don't want to go there and then have to get a taxi into central London. The whole point of it is that you get on that train and you get to central London. So I think you have to take the hit with that. But with the trains themselves, I mean, surely... I mean, I heard something in the newspaper the other day that there's a Chinese company that said, we can do it HS2 for you and we can do it in 5 years.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. And then at the minute with tensions, is everything going on with China? It's that's the thing. What you've seen what they can do, but then will the UK government trust them to do it, or whatever will happen?
That's it, isn't it? I mean, there was a horror story. I don't know if this is true. I really don't. So there's my disclaimer put in straight away. But a couple of years ago, China tried to create a high-speed train. I think it was about 10 years ago, to compete with the bullet train. And it was a thing of, look, we can do it now. We can compete with the Japanese. We've got the manpower, which they have. They've got far more manpower than the Japanese have. And we can do it. And on its maiden voyage, so the rumour says. I mean, there weren't very reputable sources. These apparently the train came off the track on a very high speed and killed everybody on board that was testing it. And you think that's quite a sort of scary horror story. If that's what it was, if that was a sort of a very misguided way of trying to get companies to not deal with Chinese companies, then it worked, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh no, I'd never do this, or I'd never do that. You'd never want that over here," sort of thing. Health and safety wouldn't allow that sort of thing. And you think rumours like that are probably untrue, but completely will throw out public opinion. And the public, quite rightly, should be allowed to say what they think about projects like this. And that's like I think you were probably going to come on to it, the whole thing with Huawei and the 5G network and all of that. And
exactly,
Trump coming out and saying, no, if you want this special relationship with us after Brexit, you're going to have this. It's becoming very complicated now. Gone are the days where it was, okay, we'll do this for you and you pay us and we'll go home. It's okay, yeah, we'll do this for you, but what else can we get out of it, sort of thing. It's quite worrying in that sense.
Yeah, I think there's so much with the aspect of China coming in with it. There's the Hawaii aspect, and just with everything. I think that when you referenced earlier about the coronavirus aspect as well, is the fact that one kind of, along with the story that you're saying, one kind of thing that worries me about China is the fact that with they've built amazing things over there and they seem to work, but these stories that you hear after the coronavirus where they've tried to cover things up because things haven't been done properly or the way that things have spread, is the fact that you worry if that gets implemented over here and accidents may happen just because things may not have been, like you said, checked properly, or it's easy to cover up things. All societies will have cover-ups, but I think of the recent kind of outbreak of what's happened with China and the bad publicity that country at the minute is going through, people are a bit more heightened to what's going on.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate, isn't it? Because a whole nation is being sort of blamed almost for something that was they didn't want it. But as you say, that the way that they could build. I don't know whether you saw some of those videos or stories of how quickly they built those hospitals.
Yes, it's unbelievable.
And in terms of that's the thing. That's the difference in terms of being able to. We worked on a previous job with some outsourcing, so some Chinese companies that would do the development of software for us. So we spec it out and they do it for us. And I remember they came to Liverpool and they thought it was amazing that the construction sites were empty at night. And I said, well, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, why is nobody working?" So it was night time. You can't work at night time. Everybody 9 to 5, people go home, sort of thing. And they were like, well, in China we'd have a night shift come in and do it. So that's how they can do it so quickly, because they've just got so many people, and we just can't compete in that sense. I read something the other day about the wages as well is obviously a big thing. That people are on video games now. Obviously, there's these video games where you have to level up and obtain, or like World of Warcraft, obtain the greatest amount of the best weapons and all of this. So there's a lot of Chinese companies that have been set up now, and these guys they play video games for 10, 12 hours a day, and all the loot and all the the weapons and the gold and everything that they collect in those 10 to 12 hours, they then sell to somebody in America. And apparently the people in America are prepared to pay twice the amount that person is paid to do it. So it's a completely viable business. So you're not only looking at innovations in terms of manufacturing and how quickly they can do things, but they're coming out with new business models, new businesses and things like that. I mean, it's scary how quickly the world is changing.
It is, and they've got so many. Like you said, they've always had an abundance of people and resources, just the way that the land that's just been throughout history. I think one of the when you was talking about the hospitals as well, one thing I also remember seeing was a video where, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but essentially it's building a bridge and the components, big stands going over the hill are already up, but this train is going along and then just putting the future track bit on each bit by bit as it's going along, and just some of the technology that is there is unbelievable, to be fair. I
mean, the other thing as well is that at Christmas time I bought a drone, like one of the cheapest drones you could buy. And I was trying to work out, who, because there's so many of them on eBay and Amazon, you don't know if any of them are any good. And but the leaders in the drone manufacturing, I thought, oh, well, they'll be Japanese or German or something like that. They're all Chinese. All the companies that are the leading sort of, I think it's DJI. I think is the main manufacturer. And that sort of brings it home to you how far they've come, because it was always, if you buy the Chinese stuff, it's always cheaper than the Japanese, but it's not as good quality. That's not the case anymore. They are the market leaders in 4 or 5, more different fields, and it's amazing how quickly that's happened.
Yeah, it is. One thing I'd like to, we had a really good conversation, and like going off into China and everything. China caveating that's fine. It was really good. Caveating it back a bit towards HS2. One thing I found quite interesting is the fact the emphasis that the government has actually put on to commit into helping the project be environmentally. While Chris Packham has recently filed a lawsuit against it and it is having environmental damage across the UK, it seems that there's quite a big emphasis on to mitigate the environmental damage caused by the project. It seems like this is kind of a first of its kind. Like I wasn't around when the Eurotunnel was made, but it didn't. Was there ever this kind of concern for the environment when the Eurotunnel was made, or is this a very first for a government infrastructure project?
Oh, I mean, I was quite young when the Eurotunnel was being built, but I think that there was less of a concern in that sense because it was sort of being built through under the water, if you like. So it wasn't like a case of going through farmland or next to people's houses or things like that. So the majority of it was through the channel. And I think the way that they were selling it was, well, the only other way to France is through an aeroplane or a ferry. And most people will use the aeroplane, which is obviously incredibly bad for the environment. So I think it's sort of outweighed in that sense. But with this, I think it's I do partly think that the people that are against it environmentally have completely got a point. But I do think it's almost the visual thing of it in terms of, well, it's cutting through countryside. It's going to make it look an eyesore, and I completely understand that. One of the biggest selling points of this country, tourism-wise, is things like the Lake District and the Peak District and all the nice places like that. But it seems to be more in terms of that. I mean, the counter-argument is always, well, like you said before, less cars on the road, less road accidents, less pollution and all of that. But they fail to sort of say, well, yeah, but you're cutting up all this land and you're going to take away ecosystems for, rabbits and we don't know. When you start doing things like that, you really don't know what the knock-on effect is going to be on the environment. If you start taking away, only a couple of years ago they were talking about, well, bees could be extinct. Bees are in trouble, and people are going, oh well, I don't like honey anyway. And it's like, no, you don't realise the impact that if you lose that one animal in the sort of ecosystem supply chain, if you like, the knock-on effects of that are massive. So we are sort of messing around with nature and stuff that we don't really understand, and I suppose that is another concern, really.
Yeah, it is. Because I think one of the major concerns is that a local species of bat will pretty much become extinct, apparently, the way it goes through. And like I said, it can impact so many ways, because if one species across the food chain is removed, then a species of plant, another species of animal species can just blow up, and it can have devastating impacts on the wider ecosystem. And I guess it's hard to predict that because incrementally we don't know what every single link between every single food chain. So yeah.
And even if we knew that, we wouldn't be able to. I mean, again, it would just be some form of mathematical model, wouldn't it? In terms of, well, if we take that particular animal out, then and we crunch the numbers, then this is a probable thing out. But nature has a way of completely and utterly being so random that you would never scientifically be able to say, well, that's definitely what's going to happen. Like you say, it's too difficult to predict.
So you referenced this quite earlier on at the start of the show was the fact that you don't really have an opinion on it. Like, you understand a bit both sides. So would that still be correct?
Talking through it now, it seems like there's more disadvantages than advantages. I think we've talked more about the disadvantages.
Yeah.
My thing for me being like you say, like yourself, being northern. London more than it will benefit the north, if you see what I mean. And I don't know, it does. You've got the sunk cost that you'll never get back. Supposedly it will be better for the environment. I mean, they have said, haven't they, that they will counteract the bad effect on the environment by planting more trees. And you think, well, I think you need to do a little bit more than just plant some trees.
Exactly.
For all the disruption that you're causing, but. I mean, even if it's just used for freight, which it won't be, but maybe in that sense, if we put all the passengers on the high speed line and the other lines are then used for freight travel, and you're taking the lorries off the road. Maybe that's a big advantage in terms of, but then you could say, well, if the lorries are going to be self-driving and they're all going to be electric soon, then what's the need for that? I mean, I saw a thing a few years ago in somebody was talking about it. I think it was on Top Gear actually. And they were talking about having like the wireless chargers that you can have for your phones.
Yeah.
So they were going to install those into main motorways and main roads, and then have cars that would obviously have the battery underneath. So as you're going on the motorway, you would be constantly charging the battery of your car to sort of extend the range, if you like. That's the sort of thing that you think, would that be more beneficial to invest in as opposed to the train? It's one of those, like, nobody knows. You've got to, the problem that the government have got, the problem that Boris has got, is that he's got to have a massive project that he wants to see through. In the next 5 years, when it comes back to why are you going to vote for me, he wants something to put up in front of everybody and say, I've done this, and he wants it to be successful. It's a bit risky, because everybody can say, well, I've put record numbers of money into the NHS, I've increased the police force, I've done this, that, and the other.
Increased nurses, but by returning them.
When you've got, go on, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I was just laughing with the aspect of with he's saying in the future about increasing all this, and then it was just like increasing nurses by retaining existing ones. But yeah, sorry for cutting you off. Go on.
No, that's it. I mean, and if you go back to Tony Blair, he was always on and on about education, and making sure everybody had the opportunity to go to university. And I think the country's a better place for that. And he could quite rightly turn round and say, in his 2-3 terms, however long he was in, he did some bad things, but he also did some very good things for the country in terms of making sure everybody had more opportunities to go to university and things like that. And this government really, at the moment, a lot of its critics will remember it for austerity. So he wants to be seen to be doing something like this, but it is a very risky thing to put all his hopes on, if you see what I mean. But also critics are saying it's a smokescreen. It's, look at this, I'm doing this, it's really well. Whereas in the background, he's then making more cuts or things like that. So he can't win in that sense. But I don't know. I really don't know. If it was me, if he said to me, right, what do you think? After our conversation today, you'd probably say, don't do it. Put your money into more sort of advanced things. Go and see how these electric cars and these roads are being used in Silicon Valley and things like that, and think about that type of thing. But or spend the money on all the country. What's the Virgin have lost the contracts, haven't they? But
it was the Northwest one, wasn't it?
Who is it, sorry?
It was the Northwest, wasn't it? That was that they lost the contract and the government had to take it back over again. Or was it the Southwest? It was one of them.
I think you're right. I think it was both. I'm sure there was Northern Rail lost something. And I think there's been people in the South complaining a lot because of the poor infrastructure and the poor lines, and the private companies just not really caring. So perhaps that might be a better thing, but for some reason he wants this big massive project. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the next couple of years. I hope it's not just a complete waste of money and they spend 50 billion on it and nothing happens. But you can't rule anything out, can you, with these projects?
I think I agree. I hope it does work. I think the only thing that worries me is his track record as London Mayor. I know this predates him as Prime Minister, but his track record of London Mayor of wanting to create so many things, like the cycle scheme that he had, and he had a bunch of others, and they just turned out to be duds. So when you was speaking about the management, that it needs a good leader to be able to kind of direct this through, obviously project managers, but also at the top as Prime Minister. I think that's the only thing that worries me. And you're right, where the money can be reinvested in. Could you powerhouse the North by investing in? You've got you've kind of got like three in a row with Liverpool, Manchester, and Leeds, where you've got three big cities there that are actually doing really well. Could you reinvest in that side, and maybe that significantly improves the northern economy? I apologise to be fair, because we've spoken a lot about the negative sides of this project. There is some positive sides, to be fair. So some of the stuff that I've seen is the fact that not only this isn't as much of this project, from what I've done research on it, it seems more about freeing up the capacity. So looking at the actual trains that go down to London, you see a lot of mix of the express trains that are going straight there and commuters hopping on there for small journeys. One of the key factors where this project actually goes to do is split them apart, so you're having less stops, and it's more direct, which is speeding times. And obviously by having more of these trains as well, theoretically the argument is the fact that if there's more supply, then it equals more demand, and these ridiculous train prices that this country has goes down.
Yeah, it's true.
And this commute, when referencing back to the commuter point where a lot of these people are going on, these railways are still going from like 100 years ago. So the rail system is in need of an upgrade. Like you said, maybe it doesn't need an upgrade, and you fully take a big gamble on focusing on electric cars or another way. That's a whole conversation in itself. But yeah, to just kind of stick that bit of advantage in there, because I've kind of bashed on this project a bit this past half an hour. But overall, would you say your mind's changed, or would you still say you're not really fully sure on the HS2?
I'd still say I'm not sure. I mean, I think the other thing about projects as well is that how do you define success? You've got like you say, the triple constraint. And obviously it's going to change, especially if your project's only a couple of months long. Things are going to change, the scope's going to change, the cost's going to change, the time will change. So if you're talking about a 15-20 year project, those things are going to change. But how are you then going to define it as successfully? Obviously, I think we all know it's going to go up in terms of cost, and it's going to be later than expected. But people sort of accept that with the mega projects. That's just what happens. So success in that sense could be that it's completed as a project. The actual line is built and the trains are going up and down it, or that people are using it. So it could be that it's highly delayed and it's very expensive. But in the end, it is built. I mean, you look at Wembley Stadium as an example.
Yes.
That was massively over. I mean, people didn't want it. They didn't want to get rid of the old stadium. It's where they won the World Cup in 1966. Why get rid of it, sort of thing. But they had to move with the times. And now nobody would say that was an unsuccessful project, even though it was hugely overcosted and hugely late. But any football fan that goes there will say, yeah, it was worth it. Because it's a fantastic stadium and it's being used all the time, and not just for football. So of looking at it in the sense of, I mean, it's a bit of a political way of looking at it, isn't it? In terms of, rather than saying there's no hard and fast, is it successful or is it not successful? It's a subjective measure, if you like. But I think as long as people use it and it sort of, even if it just, like you say, brings prices down for the normal commuter that maybe doesn't go to London but feels a benefit when he goes to Birmingham, then fair play.
Yeah. Right, well, thank you for that. It's been really good talking to you. I don't want to hold on to you too long. It's going a bit there. I've just got one final question, and it's something I've asked everyone, and it's kind of not related to this. If you could give one piece of advice, it could be to anyone, it could be to students as you're a lecturer, just very vaguely, what advice would you give?
Just any type of
Any type of advice. Could be anything, could be something very specific, could be something very vague, could be anything.
I think it's a piece of advice that I need to take myself, really, which is don't sweat the small stuff. 9 times out of 10, the things you really worry about won't ever happen. And obviously, it's sort of a 2-point thing. Make sure you're prepared, obviously. So, worry a little bit in terms of what can happen. This is particularly important in projects, I suppose. Think about what can go wrong and have plans in place in case things do go wrong. But don't sort of paralyse yourself in terms of, you can't actually think because you're worrying so much in terms of things like that. And I think what's happening now with the coronavirus, I part of me wonders whether the government is saying it to make people worry, if you like. So the people that are not normally worried by it, it's almost a thing of, right, come on, let's kick you into action sort of thing. But so having not stressing too much about the little things, but also making sure that you're prepared. That's a very long piece of advice, sorry.
It's all right, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Right, well, thank you for that, Matthew. It's been fantastic speaking to you and getting your insight on the HS2. All the best. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, feel free to subscribe and share, and give the show a 5-star rating on all the podcast apps. Thank you.